record button. And now I am delighted to welcome the author of The Wisdom of Age, Jeff Rubin, who is a thought leader on the topics of ageism and age discrimination. And this has been a very popular topic for us here on these discussions. So I'm really charged up to welcome Jeff to the stage here. Jeff, I'm delighted to meet you in person because somehow, some way, I subscribe to your emails, and you send out some very thought-provoking emails that a lot of times address ageism topics, which is something that I am very passionate about. And I'm glad that we were able to connect and get you on here with our discussions. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me.
You bet. And before we dive into, you sharing your thoughts, and I really like to get our audience to get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led to your current, I guess, career, or however we want to frame you as an advocate. Tell us the journey that you've been on, and then we'll dive into the topic of ageism and age discrimination.
I thought about that because people have asked me, how'd you get into this field, and what motivated you? And the more I think about it, the earlier I go back in terms of what motivated me. And actually, it goes back almost to the beginning. I'm a child of the 50s. I grew up outside of New York City in a very blue-collar community that was totally a mixed metaphor for what was happening at the time. Very few air conditionings, front stoop kind of communities, and storefronts. And my father owned a watch repair store, and my family lived over the store. But it was in those days where everyone was family. My parents' friends, I never thought of them as old. I thought of them as people who just cared about me. If I got out of line, somebody'd say something. If it was time for dinner, my mother would do the proverbial thing where she'd open the window and yell out, "Jeff, it's time for dinner." And if I didn't hear her, somebody else told me. But I was surrounded by so many different people and characters that they truly formed my beliefs at the time. So I say I grew up in the 50s, but I came to fruition in the 60s. A lot of what I believe today came out of that period of time. So, and I have two careers. I started out in newspapers, and I worked for a number of community newspapers for years, and only got into this field by accident. I was living in Denver at the time, and my mother was ill, and she lives in New Jersey, or lived in New Jersey, and I became a long-distance caregiver, one of many at the time, and probably more so today. And I have two older brothers who live in very close to where my mom lived, but they had really not any inkling of what was happening, or the resources available, or how to address some of the issues that my mother was facing. And I, having a research background, there were two books that started me on this journey 25 years ago. The first book is a book by Ken Dykewald, who most people on this call probably know, Age Wave, and which said we're not going to go, we boomers are not going to go gently into this good night. And the other was a book by, this is a pop quiz. How many people remember Art Linkletter? Art Linkletter had a show for years. Kids say the darndest things. And Art wrote a book called Old Age is Not for Sissies. And I learned so much from that book. in terms of how my mother's generation dealt with issues as they aged. You know, my mom was from a generation where information was on a need to know basis. And if she didn't think her children needed to know, she didn't tell them. But if she needed to find something out for herself, there was a network of friends and they talked among themselves and they figured out what was going on. But that generation was really very intuitive in terms of figuring out how to get information about what was happening for them, and way before we started all these support groups. And so it was a learning experience for me. And when I went back east, I wound up finding all sorts of programs that were out there, but I would go into, for example, a Parkinson's facility. And I'd say, I understand you have this particular program. And the person at the desk would turn to their colleague and say, do we have this program? And it dawned on me that if they don't know, how can the average person who's looking for resources and services figure this out? It was a total maze, and one that left people either scratching their head or desperate for information. So that started me on my journey. And
I love it.
yeah.
No, this is great. And you had mentioned you were in the newspaper business. Were you a journalist, or what was your role in?
Little bit of everything. I started out in circulation marketing, and wound up being a advertising and editorial director and general manager, and lastly an associate director for a Jewish newspaper in Atlanta, Georgia, called the Atlanta Jewish Times.
Oh, nice. Now,
Yeah.
where are you physically at now? Where do you live?
I'm in a town called Berea, Kentucky. It's a small college town about 35 miles south of Lexington.
Great. And I know we have a mutual friend, Dr. Dana Bradley,
yes,
who is the dean of the UMBC School of Aging Studies. But
yes.
I believe she was, if you're living in a college town, she probably worked at the college that you're referring to.
Well, I'll tell you, no, she worked at Western Kentucky University.
Oh, okay.
But I'll tell you an interesting story. I started out a while ago trying to see if there were any communities that were focused on aging issues in Kentucky. And I'm not singling out Kentucky by any means, but in looking at that, I would call places like the Kentucky League of Cities and other places and say, hey, is there any communities that you know of that are focused on addressing aging issues? The shift in demographics, what are we doing to plan for this? They themselves were not aware of any, and would say, well, did you try calling this organization or that? Or it was like getting the runaround without realizing you're getting the runaround. But I found out that there really were no programs or no emphasis being placed on elder issues outside of the main work that's being done by the area agencies on aging and others to address the needs of elders. But I called a friend of mine who introduced me to Dana and said, well, you know, she's doing something that would be very helpful to know. And I called Dana, and she was the first person to start this age-friendly communities program.
Yep.
And she did it in conjunction with Western Kentucky University and Bowling Green, the city of Bowling Green. But she did it by reaching out to the originators of this program, which is the World Health Organization, and started this initiative. And she became the first one, not just in Kentucky, but in the Southeast, who really was in the forefront of starting these age-friendly programs. And I can talk more about that later. I helped set something up here where I live in smaller communities, and then Lexington and Louisville have now evolved into creating their own age-friendly initiatives. But Dana was very much in the forefront of helping to bring that to the fore.
That's great. Yeah, and we just did a discussion on the age-friendly initiative a few weeks ago. So that's great. Okay. Well, you certainly have got an interesting background. So now let's kind of like when I have folks like you on, I like to sort of just pick your brain. It's sort of like what's on your mind and what are you really passionate about? And I would say to the audience is that as Jeff is riffing with us here, feel free to drop in any questions, comments, thoughts that you might have, or if you'd like to raise your hand and make a comment, raise your virtual hand, and we'll just have a fun interactive discussion here. But also I might add, and I did throw some links into the chat, is Jeff has written a book called The Wisdom of Age, Insights and Perceptions from One Generation to Another. And I started reading it the other day, but I always like sort of running through the table of contents for folks. There's, chapters and, oh gosh, where am I at here? I got you got some really good, chapters here. Kindness, caring, empathy, insight and hindsight, regrets, mistakes, and changes. In this book, Jeff, clearly you've interviewed a lot of people, young and old, about the value of connecting the generations.
Right.
But I'm going to shut up because I want to hear your thoughts, not my thoughts.
Well, the book had been something I had been thinking about for a number of years, but the more that I'm involved in the aging field, the more that I thought about the fact that we are marginalizing more and more people because we consider them to be old. And by the way, when we talk about ageism, the misnomer for many people is to think that it's only about old people. It's not. It's marginalizing people at both ends of the spectrum based upon misperceptions and mistrust and stereotyping. And I said, it's really, there is no, you can't go to the dictionary and say age begins at, boom. Okay. And there are programs that I worked with in the federal government. Some were 55, some were 60. It was all over the map. And so I said, this is silly. I said, to a 5-year-old, 12 is old. To a 12-year-old, 20 is old. So, it really is a relative term. So I was speaking with one of the superintendent of schools in my area, and I said, look, I'd like to do some research. I said, I just want to ask 3 questions of the students in the schools. I said, I want to know if you know any old people, how old is old, and what's one bit of advice you'd give to somebody younger than yourself? Okay. The responses, as you can imagine, were all over the map. Okay. Again, the 5-year-old, well, 12, etc. And I got responses from children as young as 5, all the way up through senior high school. But then I went beyond that. And I said, I'm going to go as far as I can go. So my oldest respondee is 103. But we asked them the same questions. Do you know any old people? How old is old? And what's one bit of advice? What was amazing in all this is that the young people and the older people had a clarity of insights that we in the middle either forgot or simply lost our way and need to be reminded of them. And what happened is I had people come up to me to say, I've been dealing with self-esteem issues ever since I gave birth to my last child. And I saw a quote in this book from someone I couldn't believe, from a 9-year-old, that made me stop and think about why do I feel this way when this person's telling me, this young person is telling me that should not define who you are. And we got insights and ideas about, again, according to this character, we all make mistakes. We all learn from what we do. We all are put in positions that we hadn't experienced before. How do we deal with that? What lessons do we learn, and what do we pass on? And so I believe, and I'll pause at this point only to say to you that I believe the most abundant resource we have is human capital. Yet we consistently marginalize people at both ends of the spectrum, the young and the old. By engaging them, by asking them what they think, we empower them. And that 103-year-old and that 5-year-old are contributing to the improvement of our society just by the fact that they're alive, just by the fact that they've experienced something in their life that was meaningful enough to share with someone else. So I believe that people have the power and the opportunity to participate as long as they're alive.
I love it. Now, you sent me a document before our discussion today, your Declaration of Principles. I really like it. Would you like me to share that
Sure.
with the audience? And then
Sure.
maybe you could tell us sort of what your, why you created this document and go through the points of it. Diane Watson says, age is a state of mind. There are some young 90-year-olds and old 40-year-olds, but I'm not picking on Diane with that statement, but part of, and I got called to the carpet with one of our other ageism topics. We don't want to call anybody old or young in a perfect world. Like, we don't want to say, oh, she's an old, 40-year-old or whatever. She's 40, it's
Right.
like you said, aging begins on the delivery room table, not with an AARP card, but it's very difficult. Like, there's the language that we use is often, we're saying things that are not intended to be ageist, but they can sometimes come out as ageist when you reflect on it.
Right.
So,
right.
Okay, so on the screen here, I've got Jeff's Declaration of Principles, and you want to go through these, Jeff?
Well, I would just say, these are obvious things. These are things that we all want. Honor the right of every individual to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of age, ability, station, or income. The UN Agency on Aging and the Global Aging Group on Aging, and many others, the Pass It On Network and others, are advocating for what was declared many years ago, that age is not a factor in the determination of what constitutes quality of life. We all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And so if we're not, it's a reflection not only on ourselves, but on our society. There's a quote that people attribute to a number of authors, and it says, a nation is judged on the basis of how it treats its least, its last, and its littlest. You could say that about any community, how we treat, and I would say our report card on that is pretty poor right now. But if we stop and take stock in what I said earlier, the abundance of human capital available to us, and say, hey, let's engage them, let's ask them, let's give them an opportunity to participate. We have so many problems today, and not just today, but we have so many problems. No one has a monopoly on the answers, and everyone should have the right to be involved in issues and decisions that affect their lives. And I think we're missing the boat on that. Empower those with insights, experience, and wisdom. They're seldom sought and rarely heard. I can't tell you, if I had a nickel for every time I've heard someone say they feel invisible. And you see it every day. You see it every day in how they're treated in a supermarket, in a restaurant, just about anywhere.
Yeah, and I think, Jeff, I'm glad you bring that one up, because there's people, and this, again, this is not unique by age, because there's people that may feel like they're invisible, that are 18, 28, and 108.
Right.
But one thing that I've found, especially when we talk about the isolation of older adults and let's call it invisibility, is, when you're out and about in the workplace, in the PTA, and engaged in purposeful activities in the community, even if you're not an outgoing person, opportunities for you to participate in purposeful activities are more abundant.
Mhm.
But as folks become more isolated, whether it be because they can't or don't want to drive, whether it be because they're not working anymore, that's where that I think that invisibility comes to place. And I think for those of us in the audience and those of us in the profession, part of our job is to be able to guide people to purposeful opportunities.
Right, absolutely. Look, I think it's a universal trait, to the need to be needed. We all want to know that we have value, that we have something to contribute. And look at the people who, and we all know people who have been downsized, and whether it's said that they're being downsized because of discrimination or not, the reality is they're downsized. And how hard it is to get back in the workplace, get back in a position where they were before, or making the income that they were before, or being treated with the same respect as having the skill sets to contribute. The misnomers and the prejudices rely on the fact that we say, if you're an older person, you're less likely to understand technology, or you're not open to learning something new, or you're going to have a problem being managed by a younger boss. You're forgetful. It goes on and on and on. And so the deck is stacked against us, and even more so, when we talk about age, if you are old and disabled, if you are an elderly and a woman, if you are elder and Black, or elder and brown, or elder and, you add that to it, and it doubles or triples the disrespect that you receive. So I'm saying that we need to promote the kinds of friendships and dialogue and planning that includes all ages. I talked about growing up in the 50s and the front stoop mentality. We live in a world today where we are more isolated than we've ever been before. And why Zoom has brought us together in some form or fashion, it can't take the place of human touch and interaction.
Yeah.
And if we're not encouraging different generations to talk to one another, for example, invisible. You're right. It's not just an elder person who feels invisible, but what if we had the conversation with the young person and the older person, and they all talk, and they're both talking about what it feels to be invisible. All of a sudden, I'm not seeing you as an old person, or I'm not seeing you as a young person. I'm seeing you as a person.
Yep.
And that can be very powerful.
Jeff, a few weeks ago, we did a discussion with the team from Old School, Ashton Applewhite's group. Yeah. And one of the things that they talk about when they talk about ageism is look at, make a list of the 5 people that you are in contact with, that you have deep friendships with, and reflect on how old they are. And one of the things happens when people do that is they are oftentimes surprised that perhaps they're surrounding them with people that may be of the same age group, or oftentimes they're like, wow, look at the variety of and the robustness of my immediate circle. But a lot of this is, I think, with this point on your declaration of principles, is it's really trying to expand our network and our circle of friends to give us a more balanced approach of and view of the world
Yeah,
through
yes,
other people's eyes.
yes. Have you heard, Steve, of the Hey Boomer movement?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a horrible movement there, you know?
Yes, yes. And it's one of, there was a study done on how many groups are on Facebook that have negative attitudes about elders. And it surprised me. I mean, it was quite extensive. And so, but if you look at what's on there in terms of intergenerational dialogue and opportunity, it's far less in terms of bringing those people together in looking at the issues that impact us all. You know, while I'm addressing ageism, the message, if I talk to most people about age, they're not ready to accept that. You know, in fact, I tell people, I'll talk to different groups and I'll start out by saying, by show of hands, are there any old people in this room? Very few hands go up, very few. And I was sitting at a table one night with a retired judge who himself was 92, and his hand didn't go up. But I said, okay, do you know any old people? Every hand went up. And I said, therein lies the problem. We know them when we see them, but it's not us. We're not aging, it's the other person. And until we accept the fact that we are, we're not going to talk about these issues in a way that we can begin to truly effectively address the impediments that impact the quality of our life.
Yeah.
And I think the last one, in terms of protect the safety and well-being of older people, to live their lives without being forced to choose between food or medication, or the fear of becoming isolated or alone. There are too many people in this country where that choice is made on a regular basis.
And this is one of the things. I'm glad you brought that up, and I like that point on your declaration there, because what I've found, okay, is that, different from sexism and racism and the other isms out there, ageism is rarely aggressive or hostile in nature. Like, oftentimes ageism it's committed because we're trying to take care of the old folks, and in doing that, we are segregating them and speaking to them in a way which can be disparaging by accident. So while ageism is something that we need to eliminate, the one good thing is that I think we all agree, or I like to think that we all agree, that our goal is to protect those and serve those who are older than us, because we all may be in a similar situation.
I'm listening to you, Steve, but I have to say I disagree.
Oh, good. I love it. Yeah, I like debate. Yeah.
Okay. I disagree because if you look at the statistics for how many elders are victims of abuse, neglect, and fraud, 50% of that it happens because their children are taking advantage of them.
Yeah.
And they think it's okay because their perception themselves of older people. Oh, well, she's an old lady. She's not going to live long. And I need the money. She doesn't. Or, if I need to control her, I'll take away her meds, or I won't feed her, or I'll lock her. I mean, these horror stories happen all the time, and very few of them are ever reported. There are many instances where adult protective services do not have accurate information regarding the number of elders who've been victims of abuse, neglect, and fraud. Okay, so again, I maintain that there isn't any aspect of our society that isn't being impacted by the shift in demographics and by ageism.
Yeah.
And until we acknowledge that we're all aging, and really that by avoiding it, we're setting up a perpetual future that's the same as it is now. And I don't want to wind up in a situation where I'm the elder who's a victim of abuse because no one stood up to talk about it or address it. And it's and when we talk about it, that's why I said in my article, ageism is everyone's concern. It's not about old people, it's about everyone.
Yeah.
And too many of us too, by the way, a self-deprecation. We're feeding into it by what we say and what we do.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what you're dead on with the scams, and I stand corrected. I mean, it's the scams are a byproduct of bad people taking advantage of older adults, especially those that might be isolated and lonely. My sort of editorial was more on the accidental ageism, that once somebody is corrected, they usually realize that they have that they're looking at the world through a different lens. Yeah. We got some questions and some good comments here, but I also want to talk about your change.org campaign. But Deb Merrimer says, I seem to recall reading that in some countries in Europe, a person over 70 years of age is not permitted to rent a car. Are you aware of this or other ageism issues that may be in play that we don't realize that are out there?
I'm sure there are many, but I did hear about that one, that if you're over 70, you're not able to rent the car in Europe. I mean, how blatant can it be? What an insult. But it's not only an insult, what a perception that the general public has. Well, you're just a poor risk. You're a bad driver, and I have friends who are in their 80s and 90s and they're excellent drivers.
Yep, exactly.
And others who should never be behind the wheel of a car. So it works both ways, but let's not put everybody in the same pot.
Absolutely. Let me read a few of the comments. Joanne Johnson, we're so hung up on labels, respect and dignity do not have an age. Really good, Joanne. Meryl Kubrin, the heart of this discussion is biased against older adults. And Mary responds to that and says, this presentation goes deeper into the concept of ageism beyond the words we use to attitudes. And Dana Bradley, our mutual friend, says, great conversation, Jeff. Thank you for bringing your insight to all of us. Exciting to see you bring the rights of older persons into our dialogue. Joanne says, drop the isms. Age is a product of and testimony to our increased ability to live long and fruitful lives. And Jean asks, do you have any recommendations to help us stay vibrant? Any thoughts on that? Like,
it can be as simple as believe in yourself. You don't need to run a 4-minute mile, or you don't need to jump out of an airplane to prove that you're still able. But recognize that even the smallest thing you can do can make a difference in someone else's life. I'll use a perfect example here. I spoke to a group of elders a while back about a program called the Foster Grandparent Program. Now, many people have probably heard about that. A program that I ran was called the Senior Companion Program, and I want to talk about both of them briefly. But the Foster Grandparent Program, they told me how it started. And it started where they had a two-way mirror, and they had a room full of kids who were preschoolers who were playing with the toys in the room. And there was a rocking chair in the room. and the noise level, as it would with kids over time, went up. And all of a sudden the door opens and an older gentleman comes in, sits down in a rocking chair and rocks. And as he rocks, the noise level goes down. Kids are back to playing and this and that, and the guy falls asleep. Okay. So I said to the audience, how many of you volunteer? And they said, well, I don't know. I don't know what I could do. I really don't have time. I said, if you do nothing more than sit down in a rocking chair and fall asleep, you can make a difference. And so that's my point. You don't have to do great things. You just have to do something. You know?
And I love this, and I love that. I'm really glad you asked this question. Let's see, who was that? Gene, because as I was listening to Jeff's response, I was struck by, we all know people that are in wheelchairs and use walkers that we would define as vibrant. Like, being vibrant has nothing to do with physical ability, being a adventure seeker or what have you. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face when we view growing older, because it's sort of like, well, I can't play golf anymore, so I'm old and I'm not vibrant. There are millions of ways that we can all impact the world. And I would say that what I heard from Jeff is, if you want to be vibrant, help somebody else. Like get out there and contribute. And if you're breathing, you can contribute,
Let me, it's important for me to share one other story with you if I can. Do we have
Great.
time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Everyone's heard of AmeriCorps, Vista, Learn and Serve. They were all under the umbrella of the Corporation for National and Community Service. And it said that anyone from a young age to over 100 can make a difference as a volunteer. Well, there was a component there still is. It's called the Senior Service Corps. The Senior Service Corps is made up of 3 programs. The Senior Companion Program, which matched elders with frail elderly and adult disabled individuals and helped to keep them independent and in their own home for as long as possible. The second one was Foster Grandparent Program, which matched elders with young people so they could tutor them, they could deal with latchkey kids, they could do a number of different things. And then the last one was RSVP, Retired Senior Volunteer Program. The Foster Grandparent and the Senior Companion Program were stipended programs, which meant that if you're on fixed income, if you are an elder person on a fixed income, and in this program, I think it was 135% of poverty level, you could enter into the program. In exchange for putting in 20 hours of service a week, you received a modest stipend, I underline modest, that didn't count against your benefits. So the federal government was offering a stipend and showcasing the fact that elders could contribute in meaningful ways. Now, the stipend hasn't changed in 25, 30, 40 years. I mean, when I started it, when I was running that program, it was $2.50 an hour. I think it's now, it might be up to $3 an hour. But think about this. The program I ran had 100 volunteers. The entry age was 60. The oldest was 91. And each of them were putting in 20 hours of service a week, not a month, not a week. So you had 200,000 hours of volunteer service contributed by people 60 and over, helping, and they each had what they called clients, 3 to 5 clients that they took care of. Now, you multiply that times and how many, okay. And for $3 an hour, what a cost-effective program it was to keep people out of assisted living and nursing homes, because most of us, if not all, want to remain in our own home for as long as possible. Okay, 2 things come out of this. The program can be very creative. You can go into the person's home. In the program I ran, Foster Grandparent, you go into the person's home and you can provide companionship. Well, today, how much are we talking about isolation and loneliness? If you can provide peer-to-peer interaction, you're addressing that. The other thing is they began to help them with grocery shopping, light housekeeping, taking them to a doctor's appointment. It really took on a life of its own. But you could be very creative. And we did something in Denver that I think was extremely creative. We had volunteers work in the Denver Police Department in the Elder Crimes Unit. And the reason we did that was because maybe 3 out of 10 elders ever report that they've been a victim of abuse. And if they come forth to do so, who are they usually talking to? They're talking to a young policeman who could be their grandchild, and it just adds to the feeling of degradation of having to repeat this to someone they normally wouldn't do. But when you have a peer as a volunteer in there, now you have someone who's talking to someone their own age and someone who can work with them and walk them through the system. Everything will be okay, and are there with them through the whole process. Now, what an incredibly valuable asset to have, okay? However, I learned later on that we see elders as the recipients of service, not the providers of service. And because of that, we miss out on so much. Now, those programs are still out there, and there's variations on the theme. But to tell me, people who could never think of themselves as volunteers could now become a volunteer and get some additional incomes. Like I said, it's not a lot, but it could make a difference. That's a big deal. But I will tell you that there was an op-ed piece in the New York Times as late as 2015, which described elders as being a drain on our resources. And I see just the opposite, not a drain on our resources. There are opportunities that go unaddressed. So
I love it. And that clarifies also why in your declaration there, you reference human capital so much is that we have to shift from the language of the silver tsunami, the burden on our society, to the asset of human capital. Okay, let me read a few of these comments here.
I would just say that it switched to a thinking about positive aging. Positive aging.
Yep, I love it. Let's see. Barbara Sperry says, is ageism being perpetuated by technology? While it's helpful for us, it is also divisive. Those who get it and those who do not, for many older adults, they are being left in the dust. And, let's frame this. Very good, Barbara. And Jeff, I want your comments on this because I'm just thinking as I'm responding. There is a divide with technology, and it's not exclusive to older adults. And this is on all the headlines. Yes, some older adults may not be technically savvy or intimidated, but there's also the income disparity. Is that, there are young people that aren't able to use technology because they can't afford it. Their families can't afford it. And there's older adults who want to use technology, but they can't afford it either. So I think age and income does play a role in technology being a separator.
Well, you can go ahead. I'll wait.
Let's see. I'm just looking at some of the other comments. Joanne Johnson says, my dream would be for daycare centers to be adjacent to senior living communities. And there needs to be more of those. There are a few schools, and Easter Seals here in the Washington area has a combination adult daycare and children's daycare. But I do feel that's a great direction. And hopefully in the future, we just eliminate all age segregated housing and care models, and they are open to all ages. Let's see, Ken Silverstein. I had an uncle who was an avid golfer, and I used to remember him saying to me as a kid, golf is a game you can grow old with. Yes. Yeah. Picking sports and activities that can be carried on through all abilities. Somebody else made a comment is that if you can't stop playing golf anymore, you can still teach people to play
Sure.
and share your passion.
Yeah.
And then Kathleen says, how do we address neglect, abuse, fraud of elders by children, especially when the elder may not perceive this as abuse and have the means to report? This is partly an education issue. Yeah, Jeff, you were talking about that earlier, is that, oftentimes it's the children of the elders committing abuse.
Yes, yes. Well, there's a National Elder Abuse Society or National Elder Abuse Organization that people can turn to, who are far more competent than I am to talk about how you deal with that. But I think on the local level, the more we are aware of the issues that not only our elders in our community face, but if, again, going back to the fact that if things don't change, we may find ourselves in that position at some point. We owe it to ourselves to speak up and begin to change the thinking of what is important. We're talking about quality of life. We all want to have a good quality of life as we age. And however you feel about whether there should be assistance from the government or not, the reality today is the government is not in a position and will never be in a position to provide the kind of support that we need. Therefore, it is incumbent upon us to figure out ways that we can work together to change and broaden the options open to us to impact affordable housing, social engagement, transportation, isolation, employment, education, outdoors, etc. You go across the board. These are issues that don't just affect the elder, they affect everyone. And you know what? Many people on the call, I'm sure yourself included, may have been involved in some sort of leadership training program at some point in your career. Most colleges or universities and local governments do a leadership training program. If you're 20 something or 30 something, maybe 40 something, you can be accepted into a leadership training program. What happens when you're 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 or 90, or you're in your teens? We don't have an intergenerational leadership program. Think about that in terms of the variety of input and insight that can come into play here if we see ourselves as self-directed leaders. We're not doing that now. There's so much that we could do. And I'll tell you, my book has helped to spawn some of these things right now. We're creating community wisdom circles, which I'm happy to talk about at some point, but that's one example of what we're doing. And I'm working.
Yeah, I wanted to, I looked at the clock. We got about 5 minutes. So I want to make sure that we bring up your change.org petition, which I just signed, and there's no charge to sign this. And I'm dropping into chat this link, but tell us a little bit about this, Jeff.
Okay, I found out about this organization called change.org, which gives people the opportunity to petition for changes in all sorts of things. And I looked to see what was being done to address elder issues, and I didn't find much on here. So I launched this a while ago, and as you can see, we have something like 388 people have signed it. If you get to 500, it takes you to another level, and there's more promotion, what have you. But this goes to, if you click on it, you'll see who it's going to. Congress and the Senate, and it's going to a variety of it's going to the president, it's going to the League of Governors, et cetera, et cetera. So they're seeing that people are interested in this. Now, while we only have 388 at this point, we had over 13,000 people look at this. And that in itself is a statement that people are getting educated about some of these issues. Whether they sign it or not right now is another story, but I would love to see more people get behind this.
Yeah, so folks, to take a few minutes, sign that, and let's help Jeff get to the next level. And we're all along for the ride. I mean, this is going to benefit all of us. Let's see, Karen Bruchet says, I've noticed that during the pandemic, many workers in their 60s and 70s have left or are leaving their careers. It'll be interesting to see what shifts in employment and volunteerism will result. Yeah, you hear a lot of people. I think the pandemic caused a lot of us to reflect on, what our purpose is. Right. And one of the benefits, there are challenges, especially in the workplace with age discrimination, but the pandemic has opened up a sort of a different way that we can work, more flexibility, and that you hope that would be better for all people of all ages.
Mm-hmm. You know who the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs are today?
Yeah,
people 60 and over.
Yep.
And part of it is because they can't get back in the race in employment. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. Well, holy cow, we burned through another hour. It goes super quick, fast. I can't believe this. I really want to thank our audience once again for your great comments and questions. And Jeff, I'm really glad that we connected, and this will definitely not be the last time that we connect. Any sort of closing thoughts or that you'd like to share? And just a reminder, I've recorded this, so I'll make sure that the recording is up this afternoon and the podcast.
Yeah, a couple of quick things. One, if anyone's interested in reaching me, you can get a hold of me at jeff@wisdomofage.net. And I'm open to answering any questions. I'm open to conversation about any subject, and I'm open to any help that you guys are prepared to give. This is a journey that needs a lot of players. We need to hear from a lot of voices if we're going to change the dynamics of aging. And I welcome your support. I welcome your volunteerism, and I assure you that there's something for everyone on this call that they can do. So
great. And I dropped your contact there, Jeff, and I highly recommend everybody reaching out to Jeff. Get on his email list, because I really like getting your periodic emails. They're thought-provoking and they're great. And sign the petition. And Jeff, we'll check in with you in the new year and have another one of these discussions and hear what's on your mind.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you so much, Steve.
All right, everybody. Have a great weekend.